Yes, welcome to the Biz Communication Show. I'm your host, Bill Lampton, discussing communication tips and strategies that will boost your business. And I know they will boost mine as well. Thanks for being with us, either on video or podcast. Great to have you here for this discussion. And our guest today is one that I've hosted numerous times on the Biz Communication Show. She's a valuable resource. Her name is Dawn Echols. Dawn is a licensed professional counselor based in the greater Atlanta area in Gainesville, Georgia, where my operation is based. She's a counselor and life coach who has been a guest on this program frequently, as I mentioned, and I'm delighted to welcome her again. For 10 years, she has headed her own firm, Dawning Phoenix. She's the owner and executive director. Dawn helps clients cope with life's daily issues and challenges. I have to put in here that her background shows what a versatile person she is. She's taught classical music. She's broken sales records in the insurance industry, taught psychology at a university, worked in customer service, sales, and as a marketing consultant. So when she counsels people, she comes to them with many experiences of her own. And so join me, please, in welcoming Dawn Echols. Hello, Dawn.
Hello, Dr. Bill. It's so great to be with you again today.
It's great to be with you, and we're going to discuss some issues which are vital for business professionals to consider. And to begin with, Dawn, one of the points that I want us to explore is the bit of people who, in the business and professional world, feel that they simply must work 70 hours a week or more if they're going to be a success. Some complain about it, say, I'm sorry, that's just what I have to do. Others boast about it, that this is a point of pride. So, as a professional counselor who deals with people so often, my question to you to begin with is what impact does it have on a person, long range, if they consistently, without much exception, put in 70 hours plus weeks in their job?
It can, depending on the person, I think it's important to first qualify that some people really enjoy, energized, they love their work. There's not a day, that famous saying, if you love what you do, you won't work a day in your life. There's the other piece of that, though, that also says that if a person, especially in a corporate job, and this is true for self-employed people, but because they feel they have a certain level of control over what they're doing, you hear it less often from self-employed people. Their stress is a little bit different at times. But a corporate or an employed person on salary or hourly, if you push them and they're feeling that they can't, or their perception is that they can't limit and take breaks, they are going to burn out, or they will be exhausted, or their productivity will be reduced. And it can take a long-term physical health toll. It shows up first most often in usually mental health. And that's true more. That's a Western kind of culture raised answer. Some people will experience it more physically, especially if they don't think of themselves, or their belief system doesn't allow them to, meaning all of us have beliefs. And they may say, well, it's not okay for me to complain or not be mentally well. And so then it'll pop up as sleep problems, headaches, gastrointestinal distress, other things, which can have biological points to it. But usually, in this case, when we look at stress on the job, stress is a powerful indicator on our physical health, not just our mental health. And it can take a toll. And that kind of work schedule without any unplugged time, or without a break, or without recreation, can then lead to stress and illness.
And one thing about it, Dawn, that stress which develops almost inevitably is not the stress that individual alone feels. Everybody around them is going to feel it. I had a boss one time for 5 years who had absolutely no hobby, no time away from his work, no diversion. And I can well remember one time we were all sitting around chatting. I guess we'd call it the cabinet of this college, the chief administrators. And in our discussion, we started talking about, well, what do you do in your spare time? And when it got to him, he said, well, I go into the office and I catch up on the mail that I haven't gotten to for that week. And I can tell you the stress level that this college president felt was not confined to himself. It's automatically going to impact the team as well, don't you think?
Oh, it's going to roll downhill then. And that's poor modeling on the job as a leader. Leadership skills are so critical because they are involved with people, and people, I saw something the other day, people, not profits. And I thought, well, a corporate organization has an obligation to its stakeholders to make a profit. And that includes employees, because without a profit, they'll lose their job. But the other piece of that is maybe people, then profits, I thought would make a great tagline. Because if you can focus on the people and you can help grow them, develop them, support them, and let them know that they're valuable, and that can be a challenge for leaders. It's not because leaders are bad when that's happening, but in the case you're talking about, that's a leader who's missing a life balance. And you reminded me when you were talking, I thought of another classmate and colleague of mine who's been a practice owner now for a number of years as well. And she went on and got her doctorate, and she authored a theory called individualized balance awareness during her doctoral program doing research. Her name is Dr. Barnes, and she's in Woodstock. And she talks about that you create this wheel, and this was evidence-based, where she was able to show this, that you work with each client in counseling on what does their wheel of balance look like, but it still has those domains in it. The personal domain, recreation and fun. For some people, that's a spiritual, and really it's for everyone. I love, and one of the professional associations I'm a member of, they now said, hey, we're forgetting to include atheism in spirituality. That is a belief system that people hold, and you don't want them to feel like you don't understand or can't consider that. Like we used to think of, oh, well, if they're not religious in this traditional way or whatever, then okay, we don't have to worry about spirituality. And some people have been doing some trainings that said, hey, spirituality is a constellation of beliefs. Dr. Barnes says that in her book she authored about daily meds. I think, I forget the title, I have it. And I think it's on my website. And so it's this idea that we've got to find the balance for ourselves that works for us. And it reminds me of a Mary Kay sales director. Years ago, I heard, my mother was a Mary Kay sales director, and I would go to sales trainings with her. I learned tremendous amount of information and got great skills doing that. And she talked about the domains of your life as the four wheels of your car. And she said, if one of your wheels is flat, your car is going to be going bump, bump, bump. And she said, you have to have air in every area of your life and keep that balance so everything runs smoothly. And it's different for each person, but they need to, it's not they need, it's good for them to know what works for them. And then if their employer can respect that and try to figure out, and that's the challenge of leaders today in jobs where they've got people, is each person is a little bit different. And the leader is charged with trying to implement procedures in order for things to get done. And sometimes we also have to balance that too. In addition to this idea that we're talking about, we need to be kind to ourselves. We need to be compassionate. We need to understand. We need to have awareness. That's a very kind of Western affluent sort of idea in some ways. But there's also this idea that sometimes we've got to figure out how to meet reasonable expectations on the job that we may not like. And that's where the concept of radical acceptance comes in, that, hey, I can't change this, but I can change how I respond or react to it.
One thought that I came up with just happened to within the past year. When we think about how many hours people work, one thought I came up with, Dawn, is this. It's not how many hours we put into our work. Mm-hmm. It's how much work we put into our hours.
Yes.
So what do you really measure on an employee's effectiveness? How long they're there, or what did they accomplish?
It seems to always work better. Depends on the industry, I know, because sometimes it is, like in manufacturing, they've got shifts and things like that. But even in that, if you've got an alert person on a manufacturing line, they are going to get more units out if they're refreshed and energized than if they've been on too many shifts without a break, 13, 30 days with no days off because of pressures. And your question is very relevant, Dr. Bill, because there's a lot of conversation right now around the labor crisis, and there's pressure on these great employees that produce to do more and more and more because they've lost other qualified people. And what you got to understand is if we can't figure out as leaders in those roles what to do, how to model it ourselves, as well as do it for our people that work for us, how do we help them, or how do we support them, and how do we understand while still expecting them to meet certain standards? I mean, that's the job. But if you've got somebody that's been working, and I've had a client who reported working, I think, I'm trying to remember if it was more than 21 days without a shift off, and feeling like you couldn't ask. And when that happens, you're talking about someone who's going to become fatigued if they're not already, and that leads to errors. So productivity is about the level of energy and focus you can bring to the job, how rested, how much your brain is firing, how not being distracted from the task at hand and things like that. And that's what some employers are saying. They've now gone to a mixed model with the work from home versus come in, because there are some employees that did better at home in productivity markers and quality, because for them, it just works for their life at this time. And other employees will say, that is not working. I need to come back. What have we got to do? And they come back in because they thrive on that face-to-face interaction, teamwork, camaraderie that happens in the break room or over the water fountain type thing. And so I think your question is very well targeted for today. And we can do so much more if we come well rested. And in that question, it reminded me that when I was studying classical music at Georgia State University, you'd want to be in the practice room, and classical pianists practice for long hours. So do jazz pianists and others. Band, you'll hear, very successful band people. Now they love it, and they'll get in a jam session, and it's called flow, and they can play for hours because they love it so much. They're not the least bit tired. It's one of the things that performers have to work on at night, is if they have a concert, they're so charged up from the performance, it takes a while to shift down so they can go to bed and sleep. And so it's this idea that when we're in flow, we get so much done, and that's a great place to be. Our brain is operating, all the neurons are firing, and everything is kind of coming together very well. We can't always have that, but the more often we're in that, the better off we are.
Thank you. And we'll pursue that in just a minute after this word about business communication.
Do you wish you felt confident about giving speeches? Do you?
Well, that didn't show this time. Okay, we'll pursue our conversation. Don, what I wanted to check with you on next, and very much related to this, and you pretty well alluded to it, is the matter of how much sleep we get. I know Arianna Huffington, who's very well known to business leaders because of the Huffington Post, and she's been in the limelight of the professional world for a long time. Arianna Huffington, at least over the past couple of years, I've been reading her comments that if you want to be highly productive, if you want to excel, if you want to move up in your career, then the best way to do that is to get 8 hours of sleep a night.
And there's definitely, there's some differing things that are happening in sleep study research. Different people do have different requirements for sleep, but the body still needs rest, including the complete rest that comes with sleep, because the brain is still working while the body is asleep. So not everyone needs to sleep the exact amount of time, and some people require more in order to feel energized. You'll find that if you interview, like going all the way back to Think and Grow Rich, and some of the high producers and movers and shakers in business that have all looked at these things, he talked about, you'll find that people who are in that kind of a studying and improving themselves and wanting to constantly increase their productivity. And they'll work, 60 hours and never report being tired. That's not true for everybody. But they'll talk about that they might take power naps. And so some sleep studies show that we don't have to sleep all the way through the night, 8 hours straight without ever waking up. But that tends to be what we look for first. And then if you look at some of the other studies, they say, well, if a person sleeps and they're sleeping well for 3 hours, they wake up and go back to sleep and they sleep at least another 3 hours very well, as long as it's not disrupted and the person feels rested. There's some stuff that said in agrarian societies, people, worked following nature and they slept following nature. So their sleep schedule actually suited more, not just daylight, but the seasons. But yes, there is definitely, less than 6 hours for anyone is really, I've not ever read a study that says that less than 6 hours can be sustained.
Well, and one of the things, of course, that all of us are familiar with, not just because of movies, but because of what we hear on the news. Many times, if you deprive someone of sleep long enough, say a person who's in jail or in prison, and you're trying to get them to confess, they'll say anything.
Yes.
Just to get some sleep. Depriving somebody of sleep is one of the worst bits of torture that you can possibly think of. Now, what we're really looking at here in the overview is how business leaders, Dawn, can look at certain life patterns that they have, and by possibly shifting them, maybe become more productive. And this brings me to the final question, and that is talking about sabbaticals. I know the minister of the church I belong to recently got back from a 3-month sabbatical in that church. If you have served for 7 years in the head minister's position, you are entitled to a 3-month sabbatical. And I know you've talked to me about sabbaticals. I suppose some people say, "Oh, I could never get away. My business would fail. I would feel too anxious all the time." Talk to us a couple of minutes about why we would take a sabbatical and what the value could be.
And yes, thank you. I think that's a good question. And some of the things I've experienced in considering a sabbatical and planning to take one, because it was in my case, as in healthcare, it became the right thing to do to try to continue to serve at a high level to provide quality services and keep a balance in my life. And the things that you think about when you go through that, of course, there's the first thing is I can't afford it. That's the first thought anyone's generally going to have. If you work for someone, they're not going to be my job won't be there. They're not going to let me do it. Because we're talking about a leave that is not a 1-week vacation or even a 2-week vacation. It's a different concept. It's this idea of you unplugging not just from devices like we talk about, but people and your normal routine, and taking a true and genuine deep rest. And so that in serving industries like your pastor, that's more common. And it's interesting because that may be dated all the way back to some ancient wisdom, just like we hear monks talk about quiet time and meditation and things like that. So your first thought is, I can't afford it. Your second thought is, my business can't sustain. Then there's the guilt that says, what's wrong with me that I have to do this? Other people aren't doing this, and it's not about other people, I'm trying to think of the way I want to put that. It's not about whether they should either, because their life balance is different. I have friends who are counselors who may want a sabbatical and can't take one legitimately because of their job or their finances. There are others who may not need one at the same time. And that's where the guilt I'm talking about. You might look at your coworkers and say, well, if they don't need one and they work hard, what's my problem? Why do I need one? And it's really more about understanding ourselves. And if we can take one, you kind of have to break down if I were to do this, how can I do it? How can we make this work? If you're a leader, how can you plan to allow your people? Can you give them, and if longer than 2 or 3 weeks off quote, is not working, because a lot of professors and stuff will sometimes take sabbaticals, or they'll take research breaks. They'll go somewhere, they'll do offsite at another college, they'll get away from meetings, they'll get really involved in a topic of passion for them, and they come back energized as a professor when they do that. So sabbaticals is kind of, used to be anyway, a little more common in universities. I've talked to professors here at some of the Gainesville universities that have done that, and they come back better prepared and more energized to teach. And they're more involved with their students because they've had that chance to not be interrupted, to be out of their daily routine, and kind of focus on something very specific. So if we're leading people and they need that, we've got to figure out maybe how can we provide that? And if that's not realistic, given the challenges in front of us for a multitude of reasons, and that's after you really think through, is it just that I believe it's not possible, or is it really not practical? Because there's the reality that for some people, that's just not going to be doable. If we can find ways to pay as organizations, that's great. But that, I can tell you, as a small business, that's not always sustainable either. So maybe mini breaks, even in the daytime, at work, like there's a concept now in the schools, they provide a quiet room. Sometimes they call it the engine room for kids to go to when they're feeling overloaded, and they get to go to this quiet room that it's got, the lights are down, and it has different things they can do, whether it's smushy cushions or a quiet tent or a dark tent and the lights are down, or something clay they can work with, something that provides their senses with something other than what the classroom is. And they get to rebalance their engine, is what the schools will call that. So if we can provide that as leaders and kind of give them say, go take 10 minutes or go take 30 minutes, you have to leave. And that's probably why a lot of doctors, as annoying as it might be to us patients, that's why they close for an hour.
Dawn, I think all of this has been so fascinating. To me, it boils down to this, and I hadn't even thought about this as our theme, but it sort of pulls together this way. If you don't take care of yourself, there's no way you can take care of other people, your business, your employees, your clients, your potential clients, your groups that you belong to. You first, and I would imagine this is a part of your counseling, you first quit trying to take care of everybody else. You've got to first take care of yourself, right?
Just like they say on the airplane, put the mask on so that you can still breathe to put it on your child.
Good analogy. Dawn, as always, it's a pleasure and a privilege to have you on both the video portion and the podcast. I know there are those who will want to get in touch with you, so please give us your contact information.
Thank you so much. My company is Dawning Phoenix. It's based out of Gainesville, Georgia. We offer in-person and virtual sessions. And my telephone number is 678-802-9591. And our website is dawningphoenix.com. We have a blog called Therapist Corner there, as well as a number of different things about services. So that's my contact info.
Thank you, Dawn. And since you've given yours, I'm very happy to give mine. I, first of all, would invite our viewers and listeners to go to my YouTube channel. And when you go to YouTube, look at the search area and type in my YouTube name, Bill Lampton, Ph.D. Go to my channel, and I strongly encourage you to hit the subscribe button, because you will have an opportunity to look at all of the interviews I've hosted with these business professional experts, and also see some instructional videos of my own. And as a subscriber, you will have access to future presentations as well. And then too, of course, I suggest that you look at my website. Since I'm the biz communication guy, it's bizcommunicationguy.com. And there you will find out my services to corporations and leaders. And then after you've done that, and you can see where there's a fit, give me a phone call, 678-316-4300. And when you do that, at no cost on an initial introductory call, I'll be happy to hear about your communication challenges and problems and how I can assist you with them. I want to thank Dawn again for being with us. Dawn, would you sum it up with any word or two, any closing thought?
Thank you so much. I would encourage each listener to determine what the balance is for you and to work to achieve that, and then set an example for the others in your life on how they try to inspire and encourage them to do the same.
Excellent. Thank you again, and thanks to those of you who were with us. Be with us for the next edition of the Biz Communication Show.